Something else to discuss about the 1841. And that is that at the time, the United States Ordnance Department had thought, as we talked about bayonets, that it would at some point become necessary to have that bayonet attached. What I'm holding in my hands is one of the pieces that were produced in Harper's Ferry that would be altered in many different ways, many different times, just to accept the bayonet. There are lots and lots of different fashions to do that, and what we have to do is to attach a saber bayonet, which looks like this. Looks like a miniature sword. It goes on the end of the gun barrel and attaches to the side, but it gives you a little extra reach if you need it. And as we discussed before, to many soldiers, having this bounce around all day against your leg became somewhat of an annoyance. However, if you want to go skewer a chicken and cook it over the campfire, it's a great tool. Or if you want to go foraging, let's say, and you might get something if you're lucky. The bayonet is used for holding candles or whatever, any sort of camp type activities. The other thing to mention about the bayonet to the soldier is that I'm sure there were many, many camps around Jefferson County where soldiers would fix bayonets to the end of their musket or rifle, stick them upright vertically into the ground, and then use their shelter half or their gum blanket poncho to make a shelter half and to take shelter for the night or something. So the bayonet is not so much something to use for combat in this period as much as it is a utility tool, to the soldier at least. But to the generals at the time, the whole idea of something that weighed 10.5 pounds and could be used as a club or a tent pole or something to spear with or something for training purposes, that wouldn't go away. So the musket was not going to go away either. And through time, the Armory would have to create another musket pattern. They created the model 1842, which is basically another 69 caliber musket like the 1816 we talked about earlier and the 1795 and the Charleville. However, it has the percussion system that we discussed earlier instead of the flintlock. Now, that's not to say that there won't be lots of flintlocks in the early part of the war. There certainly will be. As we stated earlier, arsenals would be cleaned out, available firearms from Europe would be brought in, anything that would load and fire 3 times a minute in the early parts of the war would be found marching around in the area and in use by soldiers. But the next piece that I do want to talk about that brings another sort of revolution to the area is the model 1855 rifle. The piece that I'm holding is also percussion, and I'm holding the rifle version of it. The musket version was longer, did not use a saber bayonet, did actually use what you would call a socket bayonet, fit over the end of the piece, and it gave you the extra reach, and it also gave you the weight back. Something very interesting that I would mention about the Model 55 that was created here, you see this door mechanism. I'm going to see if we can get this to open. Inside, if you'll notice, there is a roll. It's a leather roll of caps. Years and years ago, there was a toy, a children's toy gun that had a roll of red caps. And if you have ever seen that maybe in an antique shop, or if you're like me, the age where you might have run around and used that, you remember what happened with those caps, where you would put them in your toy gun and pull the trigger, and the little caps would run around and go pop, 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 except if it rained. If they got wet, what happened was that they wouldn't advance, and those caps would get spongy, and the little fulminate of mercury charges in them would not go off. Well, the same thing happened with the Maynard tape primer. This is what this is called. Dr. Edward Maynard was quite an inventor. He was a dentist in Washington City, and he developed this piece to go on the side of the muskets and the rifles. It is an interesting and a novel idea. As we talked about before, Harper's Ferry Armory was famous for interesting and novel ideas. And the whole idea is when you cock the hammer back, there are springs, as you see, that advance the primer through the slot, and then would place the cap over the cone or the nipple so that it's ready to fire. The idea being that you don't have to keep reaching in your pocket, grabbing little brass caps and putting them on each time you want to load. So speed is the idea behind this, and utility. Lots of these are still in use in the beginning of the war, but as we stated before, many soldiers experienced wet conditions, and when they did, these would mold or rot or have difficulty functioning in the interior of the lock. Nonetheless, the musket and the rifle pattern of 1855 would continue to be produced up until the beginning of the Civil War.